Okay, let's see how things compare here. So I can see that we don't have the same choke, kind of detent, locking choke style. That's okay, we can deal with that. The throttle appears to be in an identical position. The adjustment screws are in the same spot. I think the body's the same, so if we have to, we can swap the butterflies and the linkages out. But everything positioning-wise seems to be the same, so I think we're going to go for it. I'd put the radio on for you, but unless it's playing my own music, which I don't think they are today, can't do that. I'm a little bit curious on this, what I need to do as far as licensing. My other snowmobile has a antique snowmobile license after or before a current year, or certain year, not current year. You don't have to license it every year if it's old enough. So I know I can do that, but I don't know if I need to get a trail permit or whatever that is or not to legally ride this thing. I'll have to call them. Okay, so you can see here that throttle just kind of sits into a little pin. And if we look at our throttle, it's different, but I'm thinking I can just unscrew that and swap this over to our throttle and it'll work just fine. And the throttle's really the main thing. The choke's not too big of a concern because I'm just using that on startup, so I can sit there and make it work, even if it has to be manually by hand. There we go. I've got some stuff on the way. It'll actually be delivered on video, I'm guessing. The product is called Red Coat, and it's a fuel tank sealing product. So my local auto parts store actually had that, believe it or not. So I'm going to give that a shot too. Okay, we're down to it. So, kind of cool on these, they have a quick release fuel there. Mine's a little bit leaky, you can see, but that's cool. You can just quick release your fuel line and not drain your tank. And then I'm going to take these two 7/16 nuts off, pull the whole thing off, and I think that's about it. We can bolt the new one right back on. Such a joy working on older equipment. It's just put together so much better, easier. Got to chuckle a little bit because this carburetor, last I checked, I think was $124 on the site that sells these parts. And before I knew better, I thought that was the only option. But this carburetor that I'm about to put on was, like I said, I think $12 new on eBay. Okay, so there's the old job, and we'll swap over our air filter and throttle bracket, I guess you'd say, or intake. I wish I had a gasket, but I don't know that I do. I'll have to look through my pile here after a little bit. Okay, so looking at the differences, by the time I take this throttle off, as long as this shaft is the same length, it's identical. If not, all I've got to do is take that other screw out, undo the butterfly, and pull the whole thing out, and slide this one back in, and we'll just use that instead. So I should probably take a closer look at that now, actually. Looks like it is longer. I don't really know how much difference it makes, though. Let's start by switching over our intake. Then we can kind of mock up the throttle and see what that's going to look like. Okay, so just for indexing purposes, if we open, oh, and this is a spring, this has a throttle spring, this one does not, but I can easily remove that, like a return spring. But if I shut them both, the flat parts of the shaft are in a different spot. So it looks like I'm going to have to switch over my throttle. One thing kind of cool is if you look at the difference in the bore, this is a much bigger bore on the new carburetor. So if we're lucky, bigger bore means more power. Alright, I'll take you over to the bench and show you switching those around. Alright, so it's the next day. I'm not quite sure where this will line up in the series, but we should be somewhere sort of in the middle of part 2 with the carburetor work. So here's where I'm at so far. Kind of some things that I've been thinking about overnight since I filmed the other part yesterday. And a couple of things. One is that for the throttle setup, I need, trying to get that to stand up, I need something that looks like this, because this was the original arm that attached right here, and it has that kind of eyelet that goes around the stud there and controls the throttle. The problem is this is indexed in the wrong way. So where those flat spots are at, oh, look at my dirty thumbnail. Where those flat spots are at, originally was about here, and now on the new carburetor is about here, and it won't work out. So what I'm going to have to do is modify this new linkage, or I guess that's what you'd call it, to work the same way that that does. So what I did is I took this over to the machine, I put the throttle cable in place here, and then kind of laid it out to where it was going to be in a resting position, and it lines up just about perfectly with that bottom hole in the new carburetor setup. So what my plan is to take some of these throttle stops. These are just like a cable, I guess cable stop is the correct name for those, but take the smallest one available, and that's a 1/4 inch in size. And if you compare this 1/4 inch throttle stop with what we're working with, it's basically the same diameter. I'll kind of show that. It's hard to tell exactly, but it's pretty close to the same diameter. So my plan there is to enlarge that lower hole to fit the screw that goes in that throttle stop. I keep saying throttle stop even though it's a cable stop. But this is the screw. I think it's like a 1032 or a 1232 or something screw. I'll drill that out, run that screw in from the back side, and then Loctite it in place, and we'll use this throttle stop as that barrel. So aside from that, the only other modification I had to do was I had mentioned on the last video how the shaft for the throttle was longer on the old setup, but I was not going to be able to transfer that over because on the other carburetor it just has a plug. If you look over here, there's just a plug there where that shaft ends up, and I didn't want to get into that. I probably could have just put a plug in there and then swapped this over, but the butterfly is a different size, or the throttle plate is a different size, and I just didn't really want to deal with it. I guess if I would have done that, this would have possibly lined up in the same position and been indexed correctly, so that might have saved some work. But what I did instead is just sanded down right here on this intake so that this whole throttle, I don't know what you'd call that, case, was able to move in further, and so that shaft that was too short here was able to stick out further because this slid in further. So hard to kind of explain, and that was really hard to show on camera. But I'm going to try and show the process of modifying this throttle, and then we'll take it over to the machine and mount it up and make sure that it's going to work. Okay, got a pretty close size here on the bit. It's going to be a little bit small, but we'll see what we can do. I mentioned this yesterday, but we are supposed to be getting some snow today, and so I really wanted to get this done so that I had a chance to take it out and try it. And I think the snow is going to start here in about 20 minutes, according to the forecast, so we'll see if that's true or not. But it's been kind of spitting and is starting to freeze up on the ground, so something's happening. Need a little trick to hold this in place for us. There we go. One of my instructors once told me, and maybe multiple have told me this, to tighten every hole of a chuck. And it still makes no sense to me because each hole is tightening the same thing. It's not like they're related to separate things. But I have noticed a difference. If you basically triple check yourself on tightening things, it does make a difference. I think that'll work. Okay. Do you guys see where I set that screw? Or did I drop it? Yep, I dropped it. Just slightly small. That'll probably work. All right, let's head over to the bench. You know, in hindsight, putting that nail completely in was probably overkill. I'm going to bend up my part, taking it back out. Yep, that was kind of dumb. There we go, just break the head off of it. That'll work. We'll stick this thing in the vise and flatten it out again. All right. And here we are at the vise with a light right in your eyes. I think that'll do it. Just gonna give it a touch of cleaning on the grinder over here. So that's kind of what we were after. And now, I just need to grind this little spacer down a little bit to make this sit flush. You can see how it kind of angles out at the bottom because that's sticking out too far. So that's going to give us a nice amount of clearance for that screw head on the back side of this link to have some room to move. So I'm going to pull this off. This will allow me to show you what I ground off yesterday. So right here, I had to knock each of these down so that this could stick through that hole further. And now I need to knock this down an equal amount to get it all to sit flush. So I'll just take this over to the grinder. It's not much to watch, but I'll do that real quick. Okay, so with that knocked down, if I set this on there, see it sits much more level, and we're actually almost all the way touching down here So that's about as far as we can go. So I think it's time to assemble. And if I remember right, these actually hold on the cover as well. Actually, no, they don't. I'm looking over at the cover behind me. These two larger screws can go on now. So we'll go ahead and reassemble, and you'll get to kind of see what my idea is. It'll make more sense now. Oh, I also picked up a can. Where's it at? Just in the background here. A can of fuel tank sealer, fuel tank liner, and I'm pretty excited to try this for that leaky gas tank. I'll show you the amount that has leaked out overnight. It's basically everything. But the plan is just to dump a little bit of this in to coat that bottom corner where it's leaking at. This thing is aluminum, so it's just where the weld is at that it's leaking, like it burned through the paint or the paint eroded away or something. So the tank itself is fine, but I'm just going to put a little bit of this in and kind of rock it around and hopefully seal up that leak for good. Okay, so we're all together here, and I can see we're not going to have enough room for this screw head on the back side, so we'll just have to sand that down, which is fine. Okay, looking at this, this will go on there like that. So we're gonna put the screw through, and of course the hole is still a little bit too small. I better open up that hole. One sec, be right back. Basically going to thread it in there because I want it to be a tight fit and not back itself out. So we're going to Loctite it, thread it into the hole just to give us any help we can get. And then I think I'm going to have to grind the back side of this screw down quite a bit, which I'm not thrilled about. There's probably a better way to do this, but this is just what I came up with. So, if we hold on to the barrel, lock that on, I'll show you the two compared to each other. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Sorry about the light too. It helps me to see, but makes it worse for you guys. That fluorescent or LED, I guess it is. You're seeing the LED flickering. Okay, so yes, it does stick out too much. I'm just going to knock a little bit of that screw off, but not enough to really weaken it. I still want it to have a good amount of contact, but I need to just flatten that button-headed screw. Okay, one thing I'm going to do, so if I basically go until the flat screwdriver cut, or whatever you'd call that, is gone, that would be the max I could go to still have the same amount of hold on the screw. So I'm going to actually back this out a little bit and get the Loctite on now before I lose the capability to use tools on it, and I might have already done that. Gonna have to cut a little bit more of a slot. There we go. I'll grab some Loctite here. Should be way more than enough. Okay, and now I'm going to knock that down to where the slot is gone. Need to get myself a file card. Any of you guys use file cards to clean out and kind of renew a file? I feel like I need one. Okay, I just took off the slot. So now our slotted screw is, boy, the glare is bad. Our slotted screw now looks more like a rivet. And let's take this back to the workpiece and see how it does. It does still sit up just slightly, but I think this can get pulled down, and with the return spring, it's not going to matter if there's a little bit of drag there. So we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and put the screw back in and just give it a test. Speaking of the return spring, I think I have it figured out how it's going to work, but I'll kind of mention that to you guys. So there's a return spring that's part of the Snorunner, not part of the carburetor, and it sits on the throttle cable and returns the throttle cable. And that, I think, is why the original carburetor did not have a return spring. So it's just got a loose throttle that sits in there, and if it's off the machine, there's no return. I'll show you what I mean by that here in a sec. Where this carburetor does have a return, and I'm thinking I want to eliminate that spring, because if I'm thinking correctly, having the return spring on the carburetor puts a lot more stress on our new little stud here, where having it on the cable puts no stress on the stud. And I hope I'm thinking about that correctly. I'm going to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So if I have a cable here pulling on this and it's fighting spring tension, there's a little bit of stress on that. But if my spring's back here just pulling the cable itself back, I don't think there's any stress on this. And maybe I'm wrong there, but I'm pretty sure I'm thinking of that correctly. And I'm actually gonna, let's see. Nope, I like where that's at right now. So here's the amount of drag that I was talking about. If I open it up and just release, it just barely sticks for a second. And I think that will loosen up as that screw kind of wears away at a little bit of the plastic on the back side. But that's perfect. That's what we're looking at. So I'll take you over to the Snorunner now, and we'll see if it fits with our throttle cable. So, and maybe I'll use both springs. I don't know. Obviously, if our throttle doesn't return, we've got to do something. So if that means using 2 springs, that's fine. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit of a tight fit in here, which I expected because it's not meant for that larger barrel. So all I got to do is slightly drill out that slot, which is no big deal. I can actually slide this off, take it over to the drill press, and we'll just open that up. I might even use a file to open that up just a little bit. Let's see here. Okay, let me grab a round file here. Normally I'd stick this in the vise and do it right, but we're taking off just such a small amount. Yep, that did it. That's going to fit just fine. Oh, cool. So you can see what I mean here about this return spring that's on the cable, not putting stress on that new stud. But I think at least for a while we're going to have to use both, just to kind of break things in. So that should be all right. Alright, so hopefully you can see alright. I'm just going to activate the throttle here. And it does stick just a little bit, but I'll get a little bit of WD-40 or something on that, and it'll work in. I expected it to be sticky right at first, and we could always knock a little bit more of that screw down if we really had to. We'll just kind of find out what's required here. So, all right, I'm actually going to pull this off. That way I have good access to the 2 mounting nuts to put the carburetor back in place. So that is, or hopefully is, about it for the carburetor rebuild. I say rebuild, but it's more like a retrofit or modification. So I'm probably going to end this part of the video there while I get this back on. And the next thing you see, we'll probably be trying to run the thing. So thanks for watching so far, and I'll see you guys on the snow.